The views expressed in this video are solely those of the host and the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization or entity that may be affiliated with. We encourage the viewer to conduct their own research. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of The Pack Breakers, a show dedicated to tobacco harm reduction and the people of tobacco harm reduction. Today's topic is influence, interference, and it was prompted by a situation that happened during a recent presentation at the Portfolio Committee of Health in the deliberation of the Tobacco Products and Electronic Nicotine Delivery Systems Control Bill. Sorry, it's a lot of words. This particular video is based on a reaction of an MP to a presentation given by the World Vapers Alliance. Now, I'm going to put my bias on the table here. I am one of the very first partners of the World Vapers Alliance, and I have been on the advisory board for at least 2 years now. However, it's the reaction of the MP that I want to discuss today.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I am I'm going to express my dissent on this one. I'm not going to go anywhere closer to the substance of things, but the legitimacy, Chair, is very important for us because we are developing a bill that will impact the lives of South African citizens. Therefore, it is very important that the voices that must be heard, it must be the voices of South African citizens, because we're developing a bill for them. And at the same time, I hardly hear South African citizens, having an opinion over bills that are passed elsewhere in the world.
At the end of this, and there was a number of questions asked by other MPs there, and there was some MPs that shared this kind of sentiment. And unfortunately, that's what was the rules, and the chairperson of the committee had corrected them, indicating that this was open to everybody and we should participate or at least accept the views of international groups and provide input into this process. What happens if our most or closest respected and trusted institutions are also influenced, or there's interference from foreign NGOs in this particular process? And I'd like to present some evidence around this. But let's look at, for example, what the bill aims to achieve. And if you look at the preamble of this particular bill, there's a section called Resolving. And if you read that, it says to align the health systems with the democratic values of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996, and the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, and to enhance and protect the fundamental rights of the society by enacting and implementing effective measures to reduce the prevalence of tobacco use and nicotine dependence. However, if we look at the World Health Organization's stance on e-cigarettes and tobacco harm reduction in general, here's their most recent post on what the WHO, World Health Organization, is doing about ends. And the highlighted section there is, strong, decisive action is needed to prevent the uptake of e-cigarettes. So the World Health Organization doesn't like e-cigarettes. They believe it's an industry ploy, and they have been rather critical around tobacco harm reduction and these products. And it's even prompted specialists and experts in the field of tobacco, nicotine, and smoking cessation to comment on the stance the World Health Organization has taken on these products. And here's just two examples, going back as far as 2014, where 53 specialists in the field of tobacco studies and nicotine studies had raised a concern about this position. And then there's another one in 2018 where 100 specialists, independent specialists and experts in this field had raised similar concerns. So why is the World Health Organization taking such a stance? I personally believe it's to do with the funding of the World Health Organization. There also could be a part that trust around the introduction of tobacco companies in this particular space of vaping. We know, for example, a number of very large multinational tobacco companies have their own vaping brands. But I think it's a lot to do with the way the World Health Organization has been funded. It is now generally understood that 80% of the World Health Organization's funding comes from voluntary contributions, not member states. Member states only contribute 20% of the funding. And 87% of these voluntary fundings come from philanthropic groups that have earmarked for very specific projects. So if we look at this graph of the World Health Organization's funding, we'll notice that the United States at that stage between 2020 and 2023 was the United States of America, followed closely by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And if we go down this particular list, you'll see Bloomberg Family Foundation. So what does this mean around tobacco control and the efforts around controlling smoking around the world? We look at, for example, the funding to the World Health Organization on this particular topic, and we notice that Bloomberg is by far the biggest contributor or funder of these projects, followed by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then further down, we look at the contributions from countries and other smaller groups. Placing this on a graph, this is what we can expect, or what we see is that the Bloomberg Philanthropic Foundation contributes over 66%. The Bill and Melinda Gates contributes almost 25%. That's effectively around about just over 90% of the funding comes from two groups, unelected groups. And this then poses the question, who pays the piper calls the tune. So let's go a little deeper. So it's been widely noted that Bloomberg has had a rather aggressive approach towards vaping, particularly in the United States. Research done by the American Vapor Manufacturers Association looked at all the groups in that country that were anti-vaping. Many of them are NGOs, and many of them have their financials publicly available. And this particular association started looking at the money trails, the money flows, as to where is this all coming from. And it became very clear that it's coming from three major groups, one being the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. The biggest by far is the Bloomberg Philanthropies, and then we have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they have literally paid for the anti-vaping sentiment in North America, or at least in the United States. And this particular image shows these money trails, and this is based on the 2017 financial records. But it's not just in the United States where this is happening. It's now been happening around the world. If we look at, for example, the Tobacco Control Grant Program, a Bloomberg initiative, we then see that Bloomberg has committed $1.58 billion in the support of tobacco initiatives or anti-tobacco initiatives, especially vaping products or safer alternatives in lower middle income countries. And this is where we get close to our situation in this country, I believe. So what has been known to many consumer activists and associations, consumer groups around the world, is how the Bloomberg initiative and especially the campaign for tobacco-free kids has infiltrated many discussions around the world, in particular the lower middle income countries. It prompted some further investigations, and I'm highlighting this particular article that was released in 2021, and it talks about philanthrocolonialism and its threat to global health. And in this particular article, it talks about the activities of the Bloomberg Initiative as well as the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and how they have permeated into groups, media, universities, you name it, around the world. And in this particular article, it gives some examples of what's happening. However, this article had prompted a far greater blog post, this time with actual evidence around what is happening. And I'm just going to read this section over here, which is talking about funding of governments. To the end, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids have endeavored to influence all levels of political process and in its key players of various countries. This includes partnerships and collaboration, often financial, with activists, think tanks, professional associations, media, universities, and governments. And by far one of the most famous cases is that of the Philippines, where it was discovered that money was given, or at least money was provided to their Food and Drug Administration, their FDA, for a hard push to complete prohibition of e-cigarettes in that particular country. And it was when they were confronted with evidence that we see this bill suddenly pausing and taking a different route. We also see, for example, in areas like Pakistan, who have banned the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids because of some irregularities in what they are doing there. India has also placed a really strong controls around these NGOs, and unfortunately it has become a real big problem for a lot of these lower middle income countries. In fact, a very recent report from Brazil highlighted that a group that was affiliated to the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids had done very similar things, in fact, even weaponizing young people to go against safer alternatives. And in this particular post, we look at this particular NGO, local NGO, supported and funded by the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, offer free iPhones, iPads, and Apple Watches to any individual that could provide content going against e-cigarettes in that particular country. Interesting enough, in South Africa, we had a similar project by the Protect Our Next, and we'll delve into that a little bit deeper later. So let's go back to what's in South Africa, what's happened in South Africa. So if you recall, there was the tobacco control grants. So on that particular website, you could search for the grants by region, by country, and the grants that were provided. However, when the news came out that there's been some unwanted behavior by NGOs around the world linked to these grants, that database was removed. Fortunately, as we well know, the internet doesn't forget. So if we look at, for example, the grants in South Africa, here is a list of grants since 2007 by Bloomberg, the Bloomberg Initiative. And one of these or two of these are particularly interested, and I'm going to just stop and read this particular one. This grant is to support the South African government in developing a new revised tobacco control legislation and the establishment of a health promotions foundation. The grant was awarded to the National Council Against Smoking, and that was between the period of 2014 and 2016. The approach is legislation and implementation. The country is South Africa, and the project abstract can be read as follows. The project aims to support the South African government to make important reforms to the tobacco control legislation. In particular, we will work with the National Department of Health to amend the Tobacco Product Control Act of 1993 so as to provide for 100% smoke-free indoor public places, to make provision for plain packaging, the regulations of e-cigarettes, and to otherwise strengthen the Act. We will also support the National Department of Health in adopting and implementing effective new regulations once the Act is amended. To ensure the future sustainability of tobacco control, the project will motivate for and support the establishment of a health promotions foundation funded through the surcharge of tobacco and alcohol. Adherence to the World Health Organization's Framework Convention of Tobacco Control, Article 5.3 guidelines by the government and MPs, we will be promoted to counter tobacco industry interference and tobacco control policies. South Africa is a model for all other African countries, and this project will ensure that the significant progress continues to be made now and into the future. So that was a grant awarded by Bloomberg to the National Council Against Smoking, which based on this would assist in the writing of new legislation. But it doesn't stop there. Directly after that, another grant was provided to the very same organization for the very same purpose. This time it's to support the support of the National Department of Health in the introduction of new legislation to introduce 100% smoke-free public places, plain packaging, regulations of ends, improved TAPS law, don't know what TAPS laws are, to include point-of-sale and brand sharing, ban tobacco vending machines, and to establish health promotions and development foundation funded by alcohol and tobacco tax. Now, to me, that sounds exactly what the new bill is between those two grants, where the tobacco, or at least Bloomberg Philanthropies, paid the National Council Against Smoking to help the National Department of Health write new legislation. Again, who pays the piper calls the tune. But it doesn't stop there. Let's look at the research around tobacco and vaping products in South Africa. And you'll be surprised at how many of these studies, the source of the funding, comes from Bloomberg Initiative as well as the Bill Gates Foundation. Here's just a list of these particular studies and who funded them. And what is particularly interesting here is that the same two authors are almost always found in this particular collection of studies. Well, that's not all, folks. So if we look at, for example, the Protect Our Necks Initiative project campaign, I'm not sure what it's called, lists, or at least was founded or appeared after the bill was introduced to the public in 2018. You look at who they're partnering with, and the partners are listed as the National Council Against Smoking, the very group that received the grants from the Bloomberg Initiative. South African Medical Research Council, who are affiliated to the National Department of Health and are also accountable to the Portfolio Committee of Health, Parliamentary Portfolio Committee of Health. Cancer Association of South Africa, South African Heart and Stroke Foundation, the African Center for Tobacco Monitoring and Interference, blah, 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 blah. And we have a local flavor of the campaign for tobacco-free kids called the South African Tobacco-Free Youth Forum. And of course, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner of this graphic, you'll notice one of their partners is, in fact, the campaign for tobacco-free kids. Interesting. American NGO that is partnering with South Africa, and I'm not sure if the campaign for tobacco-free kids is listed as an NGO in South Africa. But let's look at the closest simile to the campaign for tobacco-free kids in South Africa, and that is South African Tobacco-Free Youth Forum. Apologies. And when we do some research around who these individuals are, they are employees of this media group. And this media group lists a whole bunch of services that they do, PR services, social media, activation. It's all on their website there. But one of the most interesting things about this is that they list the National Department of Health as one of their clients. Interesting. Very interesting. Another interesting point is that they share the very same physical location and telephone number of of South African Tobacco-Free Youth Forum. It's the same location and same telephone number. which makes it even more interesting. So I've placed a whole bunch of dots on this board now, and the way I'm seeing this thread being woven is that, in my eyes, based on this, the South African Tobacco Free Youth Forum is a product of a PR company, media group called Tosaka, who have listed the National Department of Health as one of their clients. And what makes it very interesting is that the South African Tobacco Free Youth Forum, although it's listed as an NGO, only came into existence after the bill was introduced to the public. Makes it very interesting. So I've taken some time and looked at the research papers, the studies, and where their funding comes from. I looked at the grants that had been presented earlier. I looked at social media posts, press releases, media interviews, and a whole host of things. And what I've come up is the following image. And it's very clear to me that the same tactic that we've seen in places like the Philippines, Brazil, India, Pakistan, Mexico, a number of countries in Africa, you name it, a whole host of low to middle income countries all have the same tactic, and that is local groups that receive support, whether it be financial or otherwise, from a foreign NGO, this time the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, who has been funded heavily by these two philanthropic groups in America who are unelected, unaccountable, who have paid the lion's share to the World Health Organization. And it's all filtered through into local authorities or local respected groups in order to drive the same message across, that tobacco is a problem. We all agree with that. Is that there needs to be stronger regulations around safer nicotine products, and that certain things just need to be pushed through. The same thing, flavors, popcorn lung, attracting the kids, marketing to the kids, plain packaging needs to be introduced, banning of advertising. It's the same checkbox no matter where you go in the world. And it's problematic if you consider that South Africa's biggest issue is not vaping, it's in fact illicit cigarettes, not just because of the impact it has on the fiscus and tax collection, but in fact that it has increased the number of smokers we have in the country. And I believe people now smoke more because these products are so cheap. So my question goes to you in the committee. When a presentation from the World Health Organization is being provided, which I'm sure it will, are you 100% confident that you are talking to the World Health Organization, or are you talking to a proxy of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Bloomberg Philanthropies, given the fact that the lion's share of their funding comes from those two unelected, unaccountable, rich dudes in the United States? Number two, when there is presentations from these groups that are respected, known, South African-based, who clearly are in some level of partnership, could be different levels, with the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, that there is some kind of link to funding from the philanthropic groups in the United States, would you have the same reaction, or would you have the same reaction as you did with the World Vapers Alliance? Are you 100% sure that the message you're hearing is actually a message that's not being received, or at least communicated through the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, like we've seen in other parts of the world? What is your confidence level that they're not being influenced and interfered with by foreign NGOs? Because there is a lot of evidence, particularly in other parts of the world, that this interference has kind of diminished the sovereignty of the local population and the policies and decision making of those countries, and it has, in some cases, created a far worse situation. I certainly hope that you take the time and the effort to look at the evidence that's been presented from all parts and look at the success stories of other parts of the world where these groups have not been successful in changing the policy. New Zealand is a fantastic example of where they were going in one direction and it was a sudden change in another. This shift, because at the end of the day, we all agree that we want to see the end of smoking. We want to see the end of combustible tobacco. We want to see people live better, healthier lives. And we also want to understand that the existing act has not been enforced. In what way is this new bill or new act going to make a difference, given that we're not doing the most basic things properly? Illicit cigarettes, smoking cessation, education, when we're not doing that. So I certainly hope you do take the time, and I also hope that you investigate thoroughly the involvement of the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, particularly in groups like the South African Medical Research Council, and their involvement in the NEDLAC process, because it has been highlighted in the press and by Business Unit South Africa that they were definitely engaging with the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids in the government constituent. I find that, and I'm sure a number of other people around this topic find it grossly inappropriate that a foreign NGO, who might not even be listed as an NGO in this country, is talking on behalf of our National Department of Health. And finally, I want to know what our Department of Health has committed to, particularly if you consider that apparent association between the National Council Against Smoking and the National Department of Health in formulating legislation and regulations, given that they had received a grant from Bloomberg. I hope all of these things come to light, and I hope we get an opportunity to fix it now, before it gets to a point where it costs more time, more money, and most importantly, more lives. So, thank you for taking the time. I hope that I've provided some insight. If you like what we do here, please like, subscribe, share this post, and comment if this is important. If you have a view on this, I'd really like to know. So, thank you very much, and good day.